While Iron Maiden Somewhere in Time is rightfully considered one of the most complicated album artworks of all time, it of course wasn't the only one or even the first on which Derek Riggs planted multiple inside jokes and hidden references for a fan to find.
Yes, that's true.
And in my personal opinion, Powerslave, which was released just a couple of years before that, is just as interesting to explore, with some references being way more complicated than on any other artwork.
Exactly.
And so as a part of our Up the Iron series, let's take a look at the backstory of Iron Maiden's Powerslave artwork, explore the hidden secrets which it holds, and hopefully answer the question of how this artwork actually helped Iron Maiden on their quest to conquer the heavy metal throne. Here you go. The idea for the cover came from this little picture Steve Harris had of 5 dudes dragging a pharaoh's head along. Derek Riggs then simply got a piece of A4 paper and started drawing it, later on putting layers and layers on top. Soon enough he realized that a piece of A4 paper wasn't really enough to fit the epic vision he had for this artwork, and so he had to patch another one to it. And then another one, and another one. And then he found himself with 16 pieces of A4 paper all patched together for just a sketch. What? All of this, of course, was happening in Nassau, which was a party haven for some, especially Iron Maiden themselves.
We're gonna have a good time. Always.
Yet for Derek, who never really was a drinker, it was a nightmare to work in. Upon his arrival, he realized that nothing he needed for the painting was actually sold on the island. And so he had the paint, the easel, and even the airbrushes flown over all the way from England just to start working on the artwork. In addition to that, during the summertime, the humidity went so high up on the island that he actually couldn't continue working at it. And so Derek had to pack halfway through and fly back to England to finish the artwork. The centerpiece of the artwork is of course a statue of a pharaoh Eddie, with his head covered in namas, which I assume is used to cover the results of a lobotomy the dude experienced just a year earlier, and of course featuring a head clip he received as a result of the operation he underwent during the Peace of Mind era, which is also present on almost all of the statues depicted on this artwork, and is hidden among the hieroglyphs. In addition, on Powerslave, Derek Riggs started a short-lived tradition of putting a sign on where the Eddie's crotch is supposed to be. This time putting his own signature above the entrance to the pyramid, which by the way appears several times on this artwork. On the left side, among the hieroglyphs, we can of course see a picture of Mickey Mouse, which at first may seem like a randomly placed doodle, yet in reality I believe that placing it on an ancient pyramid is actually a very well thought reference. If you're attentive, you can of course see a Mickey Mouse on the cover of a Twilight single. It is actually a no mere coincidence. Derek himself once said that Eddie was actually modeled after Mickey Mouse. Even more than that, Riggs actually said that Eddie is a Mickey Mouse of rock and roll. And thus I believe that we can assume that placing a Mickey Mouse on an ancient tomb might be Derek's way to nod in not only to one of his favorite characters, but also to the origins of Eddie himself. On the corresponding spot on the right side of the pyramid, we can see a writing "What? No Guinness?" with a random cartoon dude with a big nose drawn above it. Except that it is not really a random cartoon dude.
What?
That little guy is known as Chad in the United Kingdom or as Kilroy in the United States, and was in fact one of the very early prototypes of a meme. That cartoon became popular during the World War II with the original saying "What? No sugar?" referring to the supply shortages in the army. And so I guess the "What? No Guinness?" saying is a reference to the lack of the above mentioned stout brand on the island. Right above Chad, we can of course see the word bollocks hidden among the hieroglyphs. And it is of course this word which will later on also appear and be referenced on the next album artwork, Somewhere in Time. Which, by the way, if you haven't seen the episode of us debugging that album artwork, I urge you to do right after watching this video. Yet it is of course not the only writing on the wall depicted on this album artwork. You see what I did there? On the corresponding spot to bollocks, on the left side of the pyramid, we can actually see a writing "What? A load of crap." Of course, also hidden among the hieroglyphs. I believe that it actually refers to the amount of references which Derek Riggs hid on this artwork in a very similar way to how we can see this is a very boring painting on Somewhere in Time. Yet I'm not exactly sure if he ever said anything about what it actually refers to, so if anyone knows, please let us know in the comments.
Write that down, write that down!
Next to Mickey Mouse, we can see a saying "Indiana Jones was here 1941." Which is actually a very interesting thing. Let's not forget that the first Indiana Jones movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark, was released just 3 years before that and was of course set in Egypt and was a huge success. Yet it was very deliberately mentioned that those events took place in 1936, So 5 years before Indiana Jones would have written this writing on the pyramid. And just to run ahead of ourselves, the only other Indiana Jones movie which Derek could have seen by then was Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and was actually a prequel to that and was set in 1935. And so I guess, according to Derek Riggs, in his version of the story, somewhere between The Last Crusade and his adventures to get the Crystal Skull, Indiana Jones actually returned to Egypt to hang out with Eddie and blast some heavy metal. And now we're coming to the last drawing on this side of the pyramid. On the right side of the pyramid, we can actually see a weird dude sitting in front of a pad, either reading or writing something. In reality, that pad is actually an easel, and what that guy is doing is actually drawing. Yes, that little drawing on the right side of the pyramid is actually a reference by Derek Riggs to Derek Riggs himself, which by the way is very first and might be the only time Derek actually included himself on an album artwork.
Simple, beautiful, classic.
I guess multiple hours I spent staring at Iron Maiden album artworks taught me one thing, that if Derek Riggs is involved in the development, you should definitely try to find a black cat somewhere depicted on it. But I guess he never actually made it so veiled and obvious at the same time.
Bro, what are you talking about, man?
In an Egyptian mythology, a sphinx is supposed to be a lion with the head of a human. And as we all know, the lion's color is, I guess, anything but black. And thus I guess it's safe to assume that the four sphinx lying down on the ground in front of the pyramid are actually cats and not lions. And if you still believe in black lions, that tail is definitely a tail of a cat and not of a lion. In addition to that, a couple more cat-like creatures are depicted on a back, right next to yet another Derek Riggs signature, and on another side, a Grim Reaper, who I guess became somewhat like a second signature for Derek Riggs. Rather interesting stories actually related to the women dancing at the entrance to the pyramid. First of all, these were drawn from the actual people Iron Maiden knew back then, although Derek Riggs couldn't really remember their names later on. And secondly, if we take a look at the shade behind the transparent Anubis over here, we can actually see that it is a woman praying on her knee. That woman was actually one of the very first things Derek drew on the back of the cover. Yet later on he realized that the back of the album cover actually lacked something, and so he decided to paint a semi-transparent Anubis over here, and thus covering the woman almost completely. On the top here we can see a rather familiar hat clip from Eddie's hat. Yet the interesting thing, which I actually discovered quite recently, is the number 111, so 111 among the hieroglyphs. And I actually spent hours digging for information and trying to find something which relates Iron Maiden to the number 111 or Derek Riggs to the same number, and could not find anything. And while this of course can be just a coincidence, if someone does know something about it, please let us know in the comments. But anyways, while the centerpiece of this artwork is of course the statue of a pharaoh Eddie, I believe that the main protagonist on it is actually the dead Eddie over here. Because I mean, we all know that the main character Eddie from an album will appear on a consecutive tour, and I guess that's what happened when Iron Maiden woke up a mummy Eddie by playing heavy metal. And here's where we can come to our final point. Iron Maiden always were famous for their stage presence, even way before Powerslave. Yet on the World Slavery Tour, they were able to perfectly tie together the imagery and the theme of the album and the stage together into one cohesive piece. Stage decorations did not only match the Egyptian theme depicted on this album artwork, the entire story told on it simply clicked with what was going on stage, including of course the mummy Eddie, who was buried on the album artwork and I guess was unsuccessfully attacking the band on stage every night for simply waking him up. In addition, the enthusiasm with which Iron Maiden fans received this album artwork and all the hidden references and secrets depicted on it definitely encouraged Derek Riggs to include even more and more of those and pretty much outdo himself on Somewhere in Time. But anyways, what do you guys personally think, and which is your personal favorite reference on Powerslave album artwork? Please let us know in the comments, and I'm very sure that if I miss any, you will righteously let me know about it. As always, thank you so much for watching guys, and keep rocking!